Gloves on, jacket zipped, an investigator steps over yellow tape and into a crime scene. They look around with sharp eyes, searching closely for anything that doesn't belong. Imagine this story again, but this time the investigator swims onto the scene. They document the damaged reefs meticulously, notice what's out of place and collect clues, and make the invisible visible. Investigators are known for solving puzzles to bring justice to those unlawfully harmed, especially in this case when the ocean can't speak for itself. Today's guest, Angie, is a coral reef crime scene investigator and science director, changing the way we protect our oceans. Bringing fun, adventure, and creativity into all corners of her work, she builds marine partnerships that are fairer and more financially sustainable for island communities. I'm Jess Coldry, and you're listening to episode 4 of Art Strategy Impact, the podcast bridging disciplines to reimagine how we live, build, and belong in harmony with nature. This mini-series on ocean governance is generously supported by the Australian-French Association for Innovation and Research. Angelique Brathwaite is a marine biologist from Barbados with over 20 years of experience dedicated to protecting coral reefs. Her work and studies have led her across continents, both on land and offshore, as a diving instructor and former submarine co-pilot. Angie is the co-founder and science director of Blue Alliance Marine Protected Areas, an organization which has now been running for a decade. Blue Alliance pioneers innovative, self-sustaining funding models for marine conservation. Their focus includes working alongside governments to co-manage dozens of marine protected areas, or MPAs, as social enterprises. This work combines reef conservation with support for local communities and reef-positive businesses. Angelique's team co-manages over 60 MPAs internationally, including in the Pacific. Welcome to the podcast, Angie.
Thank you. Really happy to be here.
I know you're formerly a submarine co-pilot. How did that come about?
You know what? That sounds a lot cooler than it actually is. I was a glorified mechanic, and I was terrible at mechanics as well. So this was Atlantis Submarines in Barbados. And prior to me, they hired primarily guys who had an engineering background. And our job really was mainly maintaining the submarine and the boats and all of that. So they brought me on because of my marine biology background. So I helped them clean up their spiels for the guests. So, pointing out what's underwater, why it's important, etc. It was such a fun job, and yeah, I learned a lot. I could do oil changes in my car. It was absolutely amazing. I had a great 5 years at Atlantis Submarines.
What is a coral crime scene?
So, a coral crime scene. They are lots of activities that are illegal on coral reefs. For example, bombing, which is a rather extensive form of fishing that blows a reef up. Or if you're not supposed to be taking fish and you take fish, or if you're killing a turtle, things like these things are illegal. So in many places, coral reefs are protected because I'm sure everyone that is listening is aware that we're in a very, I guess, dangerous time for coral reefs where they're being impacted by so many different stressors in such a short space of time. So they're really seeing really high levels of mortality. And in many cases, coral reefs are protected in many marine protected areas. When crimes are committed on coral reefs, so then it can become an underwater crime scene. If your boat's anchor falls and smashes a coral reef, that's a crime scene. So the coral reef crime scene investigation was developed by a really, really cool guy called Dave Gulko. And he developed this way of assessing and collecting evidence from an underwater crime scene, and following chain of custody, training ecologists how to follow chain of custody so that the evidence can be used in a court of law. And it's really important, right? Because we're trained as ecologists. we're not trained as crime scene investigators. So, you know, prior to this, I would have gone down. It was anchor damage. I would measure it and say X meters square of coral. But obviously, in many cases, the yacht or whoever who dropped the anchor is going to get off scot free because I didn't know what to do um, in terms of the evidence to, you know, actually, um, you know, get them prosecuted. So the coral reef crime scene, we taught ecologists in many different countries how to gather evidence and follow chain of custody. And it was also just so much fun. You know, at the end of it, we would always have a mock court with a judge and then the prosecutors and the defenders, and we'd have to present our evidence and so on. So again, there's that element of play, but that's rooted really strongly in something that was extremely serious.
Wow, it's incredible thinking about how you kind of create a space of justice through almost play and theater, but then that becomes real at the same time. I can see from some of your work online that one of your big personal values is play, and this playfulness seems to be a core part of your identity. Was that always the case?
Yeah, I actually think it has been the case. I mean, it's a part of my personality, and I think it's the best way to get people to do what you want them to do is if you add an element of fun and joy into it. And then I really do feel people jump in with both feet, and that's the way to capture people's hearts with play.
Beautiful. I love that. And it sounds like you have a particular interest in coral reefs as well. What inspired that commitment for you?
I mean, my love of the sea started with my dad. He was a swimmer. He got us, me and my brothers, swimming. And my mom was afraid of the sea, but she knew we needed to learn how to swim, and she learned to swim at the age of 40. But coral reefs, you know what it is? It's just that I am contrary, and I think that everyone in my marine biology class was interested in fish, and I decided to be different, and you know, to get to study corals, and I am so happy because they are the most enigmatic, amazing, contradictory, fragile, and resilient little animals you'll ever come across, and they form some of the biggest structures created by animals on the planet. They are amazing ecosystem, and it's because of them that we have the fish anyway. You know, so I'm really happy that I focused on corals. And it's funny because my husband focuses on fish, and we always have these little debates on which is more important, fish or corals. But it's clear that the corals are more important, and because of them, that's why we have fish in tropical seas. You know, so anyway, we can continue that debate another time.
Well, what's not to love about coral reefs?
Yeah, but you know, people still think they're rocks. That's the thing, and I find I get a bit disillusioned sometimes after all that we have done. You know, for someone right now to ask me, you know, if coral is a rock or an animal, I have to grit my teeth first and then go, okay, it's an animal. Let me tell you about this. And that's not really fair, right? Because if you started talking to me about aerospace engineering, I wouldn't have a clue. So it's not fair of me at all. But I just feel like the whole world needs to know that corals are animal and that we need to protect them.
You have a love of art as well. Do you think that art and creativity play a role in marine conservation?
For sure. No two ways about it. I mean, I still say I'm a dancer, even though I haven't danced in a long time. And as I love all arts, visual arts especially. And I really do feel, I mean, I'm from Barbados, a tiny island. Many Barbadians cannot swim or could not swim. That's changing now. I'm so happy about that. And, you know, we were always told by our grandparents the sea has no back door. So there's this kind of love hate relationship with the sea, or a fair love, because Bajans love the sea. Always there, but up to the knees, you know, and splashing and not going out into the deep. And I realized early on that the only way I'm going to get Barbadians to come and help me is if they're able to fall in love with the ocean like I have. And one way of doing that is to pull them in with beautiful things, whether those beautiful things are dances. We did dances on the beach in the sand and coming out of trees, or whether it is visual arts, putting scientific equipment beside art that's been inspired by the marine environment and explaining both of them, theatrical productions, music, dance, um, whatever. If I can draw you in these ways, theater was amazing, an amazing way to draw people in because they laugh and learn at the same time. But if I could use the arts to pull people in, then I've got them, right? I've captured their hearts and their minds and their souls. I've captured everything. So it's played a really, really strong role in my work in the Caribbean, especially. I'm losing a little bit of it now, but I need to get back there.
What a lovely legacy and way to connect people with the ocean. And I'm sure that's a lasting change as well, even if it was a few years ago. The
Yeah.
theatre in particular sounds fascinating. Could you tell us a little bit more?
Yes, I think just generally people don't understand a lot about coral reefs and about marine and coastal ecosystems. And it's a huge difference between having a PowerPoint presentation and going through and telling people this a coral is not a rock, and then going through the morphology and everything. There's a huge difference between that and having a theatrical production that relies heavily on comedy, for example, to explain to people about coral reefs and what they look like and why they're important to us and our lives. And you get a laugh out of it, and it's beautiful. In some of the theatrical productions, we used little kids from the schools, and they were the ones that were moving the cloth to represent waves. We worked with one of the foremost carnival artists, Wally Stewart, and he created all these wonderful sets. So we pulled all kinds of different people, the artists, the children, obviously the actors. And after each production, we would just sit down and I mean, it was such a wonderful feeling because we didn't even have to prompt the audience. The audience will just ask questions, which means, that they have understood enough, they've grasped enough, and they're now engaged. And that was, those theatrical productions were wonderful. And the other thing that was wonderful was using TV, because at that time, many Barbadians hadn't seen. They hadn't, they're not swimming. They're definitely not snorkeling. They're not diving. I mean, that's why I became a dive instructor. I became a dive instructor really to train Barbadians to dive. But when you take a camera underwater and you film and then you come back and you show them, and people were like, people would stop me on the street and go, "Really? This is around Barbados?" And I'm like, "Yes, we have fantastic raves." And by the same token, we did a beautiful coffee table book with Hazel Oxenford and Ramon Roach, two of my colleagues. And again, all of the images were taken from Barbados. And then we wrote about the importance of them and wrote about the art and the science. And again, people are so engaged and they can't believe that this beauty exists around our island. So, I mean, without the arts, it would be kind of dry, right? I would just tell people, oh, well, Barbados is a coral reef and it's super pretty. But it wouldn't have the same impact at all. I couldn't have done what I've done in education and awareness without the arts. It just brings that soul into everything. Yeah.
Makes sense, and it seems like that artwork and that imagery and that awareness really inspires more connection. I suppose that ties into how willing people are to, I guess, one, step into the ocean in that way, but two, also input into protecting it and being a part of that whole face of things.
Exactly. I mean, I had ulterior motives, right? My ulterior motive was for them to fall in love with the reefs, learn to swim, learn to dive. We'd help them every step of the way. And then they're the ones that would come back and help me protect, and the marine environment. So yeah, I had ulterior motives. It worked very well. I'm very happy.
Beautiful.
I was looking at marine protected areas in Barbados and looking at how we could get these marine protected areas funded and financed. And I was working for the government at that time. Um, and I was looking for innovative ways of doing. You need patrol boats, you need gear and equipment, you need a lot of things. And I was at a coral reef meeting in Belize, and this gentleman came. He was talking about using investment, using business to finance marine protected areas. And I was like, that's never going to work in a million years. Those are two different worlds. You know, we don't deal with business. And eventually I listened. He was looking for pilot sites. And I said Barbados just because, you know, why not? Let's see where this is going. Um, and eventually we fell in love. He's not my husband, and the other founder of Blue Alliance. So to be honest, it was really driven primarily by him. The thing about Blue Alliance is that we help co-manage marine protected areas with local governments, which is comme d'habitude. But the other thing we do is we work on sustainable financing for that marine protected area. So the two of them kind of go hand in hand. So I'm very much focusing though on the science of the marine protected areas, and Nico, who's the CEO, he works on the financing angle. So together it works really well. But I can't really claim credit for for being the driving force behind the financial element of Blue Alliance.
Well, I'm sure your impacts are broad and many. And I thought I might just add in for viewers who are new to marine protected areas or MPAs, it might be helpful just to know what they are as well. I understand that they're very special, important zones of the ocean that have been legally protected to minimize harmful activities like fishing and to protect the life that belongs there, including corals and other marine life, like you mentioned. Globally, 8% of the ocean is covered by MPAs, I believe, which are overseen both by nations in their own waters and through international treaties in the high seas. Scientists at the moment are calling for 30% of the ocean to be protected by 2030. But taking a look at the marine protected areas which are already established, which you work a lot with through Blue Alliance, what's the difference between an NPA that's self-sustaining and isn't?
Yeah, well, I mean they're both really important. But in terms of being self-sustaining, we were talking about being financially self-sustaining, right? Um, and that means that there needs to be some element of business in and around the MPs. So again, this comes back to my initial thought that, or feeling that business has no place in conservation, in which I was very wrong. Um, so there has to be some element of business. When we first started, we were thinking that business element would be ecotourism, sustainable ecotourism, right? So we're protecting these areas. You're expecting to see more fish, especially in time, better health of corals, and so on. So therefore, this area should be more aesthetically pleasing for tourism. And if you're coming to an area of heightened, health and improvement, then those the value of that should flow through from the tourists that are coming to visit. But it's a bit of a paradox as well, because those tourists often have the most negative impacts on that marine protected area. So it's a really, really strong focus on sustainable tourism, right? But then, of course, we also want other areas where people are not coming, that are going to be as unspoiled and pristine as possible. Um, so we tend to have a variety of marine protected areas that we're working with. Some will have the impacts of tourism as a business. Some of them will not. But then there are other businesses that we're looking at, and these businesses are what we consider to be repositive businesses, in that they have we try for them to have a positive impact on the marine environment and coral reefs, like sea cucumber aquaculture. That's one of our repositive businesses. At the very least, that they're not going to have a negative impact on coral reefs, right? So in in some of our marine protected areas, then we have aquaculture. That's the other repositive business. Ecotourism on one hand, and sustainable aquaculture, which is done with the communities on the other hand. And we do think that a combination of these will provide enough money to manage the marine protected areas, and not only those that they are surrounded by, but also those where we don't have so much traffic.
The Blue Alliance website talks a little bit about innovation financing. How does that connect into reef positive businesses?
So repositive businesses, I would say, are innovative financing. So marine protected areas historically have been financed by governments, right? And governments have shifting priorities, right? Every 5 years, you get a
Uh-huh.
new prime minister or president, priorities change. And also, to be fair, I mean, if you have a limited budget and you're dealing with crime, you're dealing with health, and you're dealing with education, if I pop up and say, help me save coral reefs, you're probably not going to listen to me, even though coral reefs are linked to all of the above. Um, so we needed to find innovative ways of financing MPAs. And this is what I was speaking about earlier, that innovation comes in the form of business. Because prior to this, we're not looking at business as not really as a force for good and for that money to go into conservation. So with Blue Lights, we're trying to move away from those traditional sources of government subventions, grants, and philanthropy. Not entirely, we still need them, but we are going into business. And to go into business, we need to get financing for that. And we are going towards impact investment. And impact investment they're investors, and they're not stupid. They want their money back, and they want their money back with interest. However, the the returns are not, stupidly high, because they also want to see returns on environmental impacts, and they need to see returns on social impacts. So there are three things: financial, social, and environmental. So they are a different type of investors. They're not just concerned about money, 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 money. They're also concerned about the other impacts, which makes them amazing partners for us to work with. But again, going into debt for marine conservation is something that is new. It's something that is innovative. Something I never would have thought of in a million in a million years. It takes someone who wears two hats. So Nico, for example, is a marine biologist, but he's also an economist. So it'll take someone with that brain to come up, this kind of innovative financing mechanism. And then our hope is that this sort of financing mechanism is sustainable, right? So that, in the next 2 years, 5 years, we don't have to go hand in cap to government again, because our businesses will continue to finance the management of the marine protected areas and the communities that live in and around them. I mean, I haven't spoken about them, but we can't do any of these repositive businesses without the communities. We need their input, we need their expertise, we need their guardianship, um, and they also benefit from these positive businesses. So it's a kind of a win-win situation for us and them. But we do need to work hand in hand with them for the businesses.
It sounds like a great system and also like it involves lots of partnerships.
Yep, it
Yeah.
does. You're quite right. You're quite right. But I stay in my corner with science, and we track the health of the marine ecosystems, and also making sure that our conservation measures are working. And if they're not working, then we need to pivot quickly and make some changes. But we do have lots of partnerships in science as well. So in every country, we do tend to work with the universities and then other environmentally minded NGOs. So far, it's working very well.
Fantastic. It seems that collaboration is a running theme in your work. Through Blue Alliance, I know you've partnered with NGOs, banks, local stakeholders, and personally have also worked and conducted research in the Caribbean, East Africa, Southeast Asia, France. How can countries and communities work together to protect marine life?
And governments. We also collaborate with governments because our
Right,
co-management agreements are all with governments.
of course. Mm-hmm. Amazing. I was actually speaking to a shark scientist on one of the previous episodes, and she was saying how a shark is swimming along a reef underwater doesn't know when it's crossed into a new national territory, and these kind of invisible borders that we come up with as humans don't necessarily translate into the ocean. I'd imagine a lot of the different countries and contexts you work in have, some similarities, some differences, and I know your work today looks beyond the coral reefs of Barbados and it now looks internationally, including in the Pacific, such as in Indonesia and the Philippines. What are the biggest challenges threatening these reefs in the Pacific?
Yeah, it's a very different context because a lot of these reefs are far from humans. And I would say that the biggest man-made issue, okay, global climate change is man-made, but I'm talking about that, is dynamite fishing, really, because many of the reefs that we work in are they're gorgeous. Oh my word, I should have said that first of all. They're absolutely, absolutely spectacular. Beautiful, beautiful reefs. And relatively healthy, I would say, because they're not close to land, so they're not heavily impacted by land-based sources of marine pollution or fishers dropping their nets or boats dropping their anchors. But they are impacted very heavily by dynamite fishing. So you're just cruising along this absolutely phenomenal reef, and then boom, you just see a whole bunch of rubble from dynamite, and or you feel it because someone is in the area um, dynamite fishing. But I mean, when I first got to many of these reefs, I was thinking that dynamite fishing is awful and horrible for the reef, but it's also something that we can deal with not easily, but at least it's something that we can grasp and we can deal with, right? And we are. So we are seeing with our enforcement issues, because in all these countries, blast fishing is illegal. And we are seeing a reduction in the amount of dynamite fishing. So that is happening. Um, that's something that we can deal with. Unlike land-based sources of marine pollution that is so diffuse and is coming from so many different places, on land that's really hard to get a handle on. And also, we can't really implement or set up sewage treatment plants on different countries. It's not something we can do, but we can reduce illegal and unsustainable fishing. So that is very much so unlike Barbados and like many of the islands in the Caribbean. The biggest issue that we're seeing is blast fishing, the biggest stressor.
Mm. And for viewers to imagine the kind of scale that this dynamite fishing is on, how big is a blast site generally?
I mean, that's a difficult question to answer because they will use different types of bombs. So that I can't answer. But I will tell you that what the blast fishing does is it reduces the reef to rubble. So of course it blows everything up. And I think everyone is aware that corals take an excruciatingly long time to grow. But the problem is that the blast fishing is generating rubble fields, and rubble moves. And baby corals need to have a hard, firm surface to settle on and start to grow. And if they settle on rubble and the rubble is moving around and around and around, then they're going to die. So the blast fishing is not only affecting the area that has been reduced to rubble, but that rubble moves, and then that affects other areas of reef, and in all of that, the coral recruits are not able to settle and start growing. So it's a huge problem. Yeah, it's a huge problem.
Yeah. And in the Pacific as well, I've heard of something called the Coral Triangle. What is that?
You're working in the coral triangle. It's not really a triangle, but it I guess kinda. But it's roughly triangular, and it encompasses Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Solomon Islands, Timor-Leste, and PNG. And this area has the highest biodiversity in the world. Then we have the privilege of working in MPs in two of those sites. So it's 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 amazing, quite frankly. And
Wow.
and and because of that, I think that many of these reefs have a really good chance of recovery. And it's not rocket science, right? If you start with a healthy reef, even everyone is talking about bleaching, and bleaching is really important and it's having a huge impact on coral reefs. But they are showing that if you start with a healthy reef that doesn't have many stressors, then the corals are better able to respond to bleaching, which is sensible. So I feel like our reefs in Indonesia and Philippines especially have a really good chance of recovery. We also work in Zanzibar, again, a beautiful reefscape. Um, and we're monitoring and we're watching to see the recovery from bleaching as well there.
Fantastic. And Blue Alliance is supporting some areas within the Coral Triangle, like the Bengai Islands in Indonesia. Is that right?
Yeah, those are sites. They're
Okay.
gorgeous.
And in terms of the NPAs there, is it too early to see any results yet?
No, 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 no. I mean, okay, we're not going to see results in coral health. Again, corals take a really long time to grow, and also there are many impacts that come from outside the marine protected areas that we can do absolutely nothing about. But in terms of fish biomass, we are definitely seeing fish biomass increasing slowly, but it is, indicating that our conservation methods are working. I mean, it's going to take time. You're not going to see a massive explosion of fish, but we've seen some very gentle increases. So it's telling us that we're going in the right direction. And it's not only, enforcement. It's not just, stopping people from fishing. I mean, fishing is a really hard job. When I first started in marine biology, I was all about, the fishers are bad, the fishers are bad. But it's not, many fishers are poor, and they're trying to feed themselves and their family, and they are just trying to make do with what they have. Um, and what we're trying to do then is trying to find a balance between sustainable fishing, or trying to find this balance with sustainable fishing, right? So fishers are not the baddies. So when we do encounter fishers who are fishing with illegal gear, we try and pivot them. In Zanzibar, we use illegal spearfishers or guys who were caught fishing, spearfishing illegally. We use them to help us monitor for crown of thorns starfish, and we pay them for it, right? In Philippines, we use fishers, not necessarily legal ones, but fishers to do the same thing, to count caughts, to be out there to let us know when bleaching is happening, et cetera, et cetera. So we're trying to manage, and we're trying to manage um in not a heavy-handed way, you know. That's what we're trying to do.
I love that, and taking kind of a skills-based approach to supporting people to transition into other employment or other ways of engaging with those.
I think it's other ways of engaging with the ocean, you know. At first, we thought that, you know, it would be great for fishers to become tour guides and take people on tours or blah, blah, blah. But the reality is that fisher is a fisher and he wants to fish. I mean, there are few that will become excellent tour guides, right? Many of our rangers are ex-fishers and ex-illegal fishers at that. And they know the ocean better than anybody else. So yeah, it's about pivoting them, keeping their love for the ocean, but just redirecting and pivoting. And they've become some of our strongest supporters. So it's been very rewarding.
I can imagine. And amazing. Um, to change currents for a second, thinking back to your time studying when you were doing marine science at EPHE in Paris as a postgraduate, were there any lessons from studying in France that have stuck with you and have continued into your work now? I, through school, learned Chinese and French, and I can say that I found French a lot more challenging. Well, the Chinese, our school went from kindergarten to the final year of school when you're 18 years old, and the first 10 years, everyone did Chinese, which was pretty interesting. And we did a kind of study tour to China, and we were learning Mandarin. So it was quite unique. I mean, I'm Australian, and we're quite close to Asia, so it's interesting to learn a more local language than Europe. So, yeah, I mean, I can't say much more than my favorite foods at this point. That's what stuck with me. Asking for a hamburger or that sort of thing. But yeah, it is interesting how languages are all structured differently. And I suppose when you encounter one that is just in a completely different shape of form, it's challenging to grapple with mentally, I think, in your head before you even start to try and speak it out loud. I have one friend who's trilingual, and she said the hardest thing was, I suppose, she said with the first language, it was like there was a division halfway through her brain, and she could switch from one to the other. But then when you add three or four, they all just end up in this kind of swirling puddle of words that seem to intermingle. It sounds very challenging, so I respect that. Good, good. And finally, having devoted over 2 decades to marine science and conservation, how do you see the ocean now on a personal level, and what does it mean to you? Oh, well, I'm glad to hear it. And I suppose being a conservationist is also, being a frontline worker to disasters in a lot of cases. And I suppose that takes a toll over time and comes in different ways of pessimism and optimism. But good to remember, like you said, that a lot of nature outdates us, and hopefully it still has lots of tricks up its sleeve that we haven't seen yet or just haven't noticed. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today, Angie. I really enjoyed the episode. Take care. To follow along for future episodes, join us at Art Strategy Impact on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram, as well as jesscoldry.com/podcast. That's JESSCOLDREY.com/podcast. Thanks for listening.